In case you can't tell, I like Goldeneye. I like the movie, I like the game. I don't really like the awkward remakes with Daniel Craig's James Bond, but hey, more Goldeneye is never a bad thing. Previously on the channel I compared the stories of the film and the game directly, seeing where things diverged and where things got changed for the convenience of the medium they were being told on, and now I'm going to do the same thing for the settings in Goldeneye, both in the video game and in the movie. A lot of people love the video game levels and how intricate and fun the layouts are, but how close are they to the levels of the actual movie locales? Well, I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes going through the movie and game, seeing where they intersect, how close the game gets to recreating those spaces, and where it all goes completely off the rails. If you're watching this, I assume you love Goldeneye, so I assume you've seen the movie and the game many times. This is a celebration of the two. Neither is the definitive form of Goldeneye and both are excellent in their own ways. It's just more reason to watch the movie and play the game again. We're going to start off with dam here, and you can see that on the top of the dam it's actually pretty flat. There's maybe one or two little towers at the back, but you can't really see them from this angle. And when we take a closer look, you can actually see there's some buildings in the mountains at the side of the dam. Now I have no idea what those are for, but they're not in the game when we take a look in a second. But from this angle we can see that there's a lot more going on in the mountains over there. There's even a little pathway down the bottom, a little road I guess that leads up to the dam, and that kind of detail isn't really present in the video game. But this angle here does a great job of just showcasing how low the water level actually is compared to the top of the dam, and also shows you where the towers are in the video game. They're just kind of flat little buildings, they're not actually towers. As you can see in the video game, those structures on in the wall over there have been completely removed. You can also see the towers here are a lot more prominent and sort of obvious for the player. Now the reason, like I said previously, is this is probably because they wanted this to be more interesting, because obviously in a video game running out onto what it would be a very flat road wouldn't be that interesting. But if we head round the back of the dam, you can see that the water level is much higher in the video game. It's much more prominent, and there's no evidence of the piers and such in the movie version of this space. One thing they do really well though is they manage to capture the mountain range in the background. In the movie it looks very pronounced, and it's got a load of foliage and snow on top, so it looks quite varied and quite misty. They're a bit more shallow in the game, and I think that's for obvious reasons because they're just here for set dressing, but I think they capture the same vibe and aesthetic. This is a very kind of cold and brutal place to be, and it really does capture the vibe of what the movie was shooting for, even if it isn't executed one for one. You can also tell that this water is here for a while because look, there's a lot of moss growing on the water level. Interestingly, on the other side of the dam, it looks big, don't get me wrong, and it looks very sort of dangerous if you were to fall off there, but it has to also be said that the video game makes it seem a lot bigger than this. You can't even see the bottom unless you're looking down, and even then you have to wait until you're right up to the bottom of the dam in order to see the ground, which is definitely a very different vibe. Definitely makes it feel a bit more mysterious and a bit cooler in my opinion. They also have this weird little structure here that acts as an entry point for Bond, and it is actually in the video game, but you don't actually get to see it up close. The only way you can see it is either by looking straight down and waiting for it to zoom up on you, or by getting rid of the end of level trigger so you can actually drop down on top of it. Overall, I think Dam does a decent job of recreating that iconic opening to Goldeneye. In the movie we get to see inside the bathroom, and you can see it's quite dark, it's quite dingy, but it's got those tiles on the wall to the left over there. You also have that pillar in the middle with the urinals on and the cubicles at the back there. You can see the two holes above the two toilets sections there, which will become important in a second. We don't really get to see much inside the event other than this sort of steel wall here. A small change here, but I imagine one that was made for gameplay purposes. Bond actually slides down in the movie through this right-hand vent here. That's where the guard is on the toilet who he attacks, whereas in the video game, the guard is actually in the left vent cubicle, which means that you can't just drop down directly on top of him. The vent itself is pretty bare bones in the game, but what I do love is that they tried to recreate the look and feel of the vents by recreating that steel panel that I mentioned earlier on. You can actually see the bolts on the textures, which I think is a really nice little touch. They didn't really need to go that hard, but they did anyway. In the movie, Bond comes down this staircase, it's pretty much exactly the same there, and he goes inside this door here. The space generally looks the same in both versions, however there is one notable difference. At the bottom of the corridor there's actually a giant freezer. In the game this is actually just a small laboratory. When Bond goes inside this room, it's something of a storage closet. It doesn't really seem to have any fixed purpose. It's also very dark and very grimy, and also overlooks the canteen where all the soldiers are located. None of this is actually in the game. When you jump into this room in the video game version of GoldenEye, all you get is a small laboratory with a solid wall at the back, so there's no actual canteen area. We actually have to jump ahead a tiny bit here because 006 and 007 use the vents under the floor, which is not accessible in the video game, to get across the facility, whereas in the game you actually have to explore and walk normally. They actually recreate this area in the video game because as 006 and 007 come around the corner here, 006 heads into this side room to shoot the scientist, whereas 007 uses the door decoder to get into the bottling room. In the video game, this is the space that sort of represents this area. This is the area where 006 and 007 come up to the doors here, with 006 kind of opening the door here to shoot the scientist, and James opening the door behind. So you can see that they took inspiration for this area. However, it should be noted that the room at the top of the corridor actually leads the wrong way in the video game. And you can see that here because this is the corridor that leads to that space in the movie, but at the top of the corridor you can see that it actually goes the other way. We get a good look at the bottling plant room here, and you can see that it's laid out very similar to what it is in the video game. There are more cylinders against the wall, but it's generally the same idea. There's steps at the end of the room that will become important in the movie, but not really be important in the game. We also have this room at the top which kind of overlooks the whole bottling plant area and is filled with these cylinders that James will shoot when he's escaping to cause a distraction. It is actually in the video game, but there's nothing in there, which is kind of interesting. You can go up there and explore behind the scenes if you really want to, but as I said, there's nothing really interesting going on up in this space. An interesting note is that in the movie, these two guards come down the stairs to try and shoot Trevelyan and 007. However, in the video game, they don't actually do that when the alarm goes off. If you wander up the steps here though, you'll find both the guards are actually in the video game, and they'll just shoot you as soon as they see you, but obviously you're never really given any reason to come up here. It's just a fun little Easter egg for those people who've been paying attention to the movie. Unfortunately, you can't unleash all of these gas canisters onto the soldiers in the game, but you can escape on the conveyor belt, which is actually a sort of secret exit that you kind of have to know about from the movie. Nice little reference. I love the attention to detail in the facility level because there's a lot of spaces here that don't really need to be in the game, but they're here as little sort of Easter eggs for players who are big fans of the movie, and I really appreciate that. They really tried to make this feel like it was taken straight out of the movie, and again, even though like the context of the mission has been changed, I really like this one. In the movie version of Runway, it's very wide, it's very open, and there are not that many mountains right up on the runway. In fact, the whole thing is kind of on top of a rock face itself and covered in lots of snow. The N64 version of this level really goes hard on those cliffy rock faces, and don't get me wrong, it looks great, it definitely feels very appropriate. However, it's very obvious at the same time that this is not the same as the movie, and this is one of the big changes made. That doesn't mean there aren't nods to the movie here. For example, the end of the conveyor belt where Bond comes out in the movie is still here, as are the large metal doors where the guards sort of pour out, although they don't actually open up in the video game version of the level. Runway is definitely the biggest departure from the movie source material. Now that's not a bad thing. The runway level is actually really fun and brief, so most players don't spend too long there anyway. It's just kind of interesting that they went to that level in order to sort of create a different aesthetic. I'm guessing it was done for technical reasons. The next time the movie and the game sync up is when Bond boards the frigate. Well, actually, we're going to start a bit before that here, when he jumps aboard these private yachts in Monte Carlo. In the game, we don't actually board these little yachts, but they do look pretty nice in the movie. No, the reason I'm showing you all this is because we get some really good looks at the frigate ship itself, and we get some good close-ups, we get some good wide shots, and it gives us a good idea of the sort of general shape and aesthetic of the boat. I think in the video game version of Frigate, they actually do a great job of capturing the overall vibe. Of course, I think they've made the ship a bit longer, and I also think that, some of the finer details obviously don't match up, but in terms of, overall aesthetic, it generally does a great job. You can see this attention to detail at the front of the ship because in the movie there's a Gatling gun and a French flag up front with lots of space, but they've actually put these in the game. Now obviously the turret is a lot smaller in the game and the French flag isn't really doing much wafting in the wind here, but the fact is this space is here because it syncs up with the movie and it makes it feel more like the experience from the movie, and I really appreciate that. The other big sync-up point with the movie and game is at the back of the frigate, where we get to see the helicopter. Now obviously this is going to get stolen, but in the video game you actually come here and put a tracker on it. In the movie you can see that it's actually got its own little sort of dedicated space here, but it is right at the back of the frigate, and while we can't see it fully in this angle, you can actually see it in this angle. After the helicopter pad, there is actually nothing behind the helicopter pad. But if you come here in the game, they've actually added this whole section here with this sort of missile defense system at the back of the frigate. Now I have no idea why this is here. I've always wondered what this space was intended for, and nothing ever really happens in this space in the game. So this is purely here for aesthetic reasons, but ironically it being here makes it less accurate to the movie. There's also the vantage point where this guy here is giving his speech talking about how great this helicopter actually is, and they've actually recreated this in the game as well. It actually allows us to look down on the helicopter and get a better view of what it looks like. You can see here how this space has been interpreted, and it's here and it's in the movie, yeah, of course, and it lets us look down and it lets us see that there aren't really the same markings. You wouldn't expect that kind of detail here between the movie and the game. But what is interesting as well is if we take one last look at the frigate from down the bottom, you can actually see the array on top of the frigate is recreated pretty well in the video game. Even though you never actually get to go up there, and even though you never actually get to sort of explore it, you can actually see it pretty clearly in the video game when you look on the viewing platform, and it's actually pretty nice to look at. In terms of the frigate's interior, there really isn't that much comparable space to talk about. There is a brief shot in the movie of this interior room, but we don't really get to see much of it, and the video games kind of go wild and interpret this whole space as its own thing, so it's not really worth bringing up in this discussion. Overall, Frigate, much like Facility and Dam, really does a good job of creating the vibe of the space without doing a complete one-to-one translation. There's a lot of creative freedom that's been taken by the team at Rare, and I appreciate all of the details they put in because they put in just enough details from the movie to make people who watch the movie feel like, yeah, this is actually part of that. But at the same time, it's a fun space to explore, and all those extra spaces do make me wonder if this was considered as a multiplayer map at some point. The next space that we're going to talk about is actually Severnaya. Now, in the movie, Bond never actually visits this place on screen, and it's safe to assume has never actually visited it at all. But in the video game, the developers loved it so much we get to come back here twice. The dish itself is pretty iconic, and in the movie it gets destroyed, we get to see all that. But if you look here around the dish, you can see that there's a bunch of wooden huts that are all kind of up close to the dish itself. In the game, the satellite is here, and I will say it is one of the most impressive things in the game to look at. This thing has been recreated beautifully, and it really stands out silhouetted against the skyline, and I genuinely appreciate the effort put in for this. As you can see though, it does cut a bit more of a lonelier figure because those wooden huts and all those little structures around it are not present here in the game, but that doesn't mean that they aren't here. If we go back to that shot of Severnaya, we will see this watching platform. I assume it's a lookout post, and you can see that it's actually made its way into the video game. There's actually several of these dotted around the surface levels. Of course, the wooden huts do make an appearance in both the movie and the game. Even if they're not as close, they are still pretty close, and there's plenty of them to explore in the video game. But I think the most out-of-pocket thing that they took from the movie and put into the game is this weird little structure here. It's got a dome on top, it's kind of got like a sort of square base. I think it's only in one shot in the entire movie. But here it is in the video game. Now, much like all the other structures, it's been pushed away from the satellite itself, but this serves absolutely no purpose in the game. It's literally here as window dressing, but I just love the fact that they went and put it in anyway. The other big thing to talk about is the bunker entrance. We get a few good shots of this in the film, and you can see that it's actually really close to the satellite dish itself. The entrance is actually in both of the surface levels, but as you can kind of see, it's not actually that close to the satellite dish at all. It's actually been pushed well away from it. This actually changes one of the big plot points in the movie, because in the movie, Natalia escapes when the base is destroyed because the satellite dish drops down and she climbs up the antenna array in order to get out of the carnage. But here, obviously, I would say that this is about the spot where the computer room is beneath. I mean, maybe that's a bit generous. I'm trying to work it out from that corridor that the bunker entrance leads to, but I don't think there's any way that satellite dish is reaching over here, so it kind of creates a bit of a continuity issue in terms of spacing. In terms of overall layout though, we do actually get a good view of what 7IO actually looks like from the surface, because we get this satellite image later on, and you can see that the helipad is very much in the movie, and they've done a good job of recreating that. Even if the distance between them is a bit off, like the scaling is changed, the general idea is very much the same. I would make a strong argument that the bunker space, in particular the computer area at the end, is one of the spaces that's been given the most love and care by the developers of GoldenEye, because if you do these side-by-side shots here, you can really recreate a lot of the spaces in the video game. Now obviously there isn't as much going on in these spaces because there aren't as many computers or people, but the point is it looks the same and it has the same aesthetic and feel to it. It's got the right vibe. You can also see this with the screen here, which you can see in the movie it has this map on it, and in the video game when it activates you can actually see it here. Again, very nicely recreated for the video game. You can really tell that someone on the development team really fell in love with the surface and bunker areas of GoldenEye, because we get to see so much detail in these spaces that overlaps. In the movie, the kitchen area is kind of tucked off to the right hand side, and Natalia comes here to make some coffee for herself, but we also see Xenia enter the space. The most interesting thing that comes from here in the video game is that you can actually see the air vent where Natalia tries to escape in the movie. I really like the vibes at this level. I think it captures the vibe of the movie perfectly, and I think that the execution of this space is really well done. The thing with Statue Park is that in the movie it's very weird, but in the game it's even weirder. The only solid thing that really connects these two spaces is the statue of Lennon that 007 meets Janice under. You can see that it's over on the right hand side here in the movie, but in the game you actually have to walk around it in order to trigger Janice appearing. But outside of this, really it's just a lot of Soviet motifs and nothing too specifically taken from the movie, at least from what I can see. Even the part with the helicopter in the movie and the game looks very different. In the movie it's in this sort of enclosed space, but in the game it's in this wide open area. In the game we never get to see the front of the archives building, but in the movie we get to see it's actually part of a much larger military complex, and it looks pretty nice, to be honest. The room where Bond and Natalia get interrogated in the movie is pretty dark and grimy, but it has this lovely little window letting light in. The game meanwhile stuffs us in this side office, which doesn't have the same level of intimidation, but we do get some windows, even if they just look out on this brick wall. When Bond and Natalia escape in the movie, they run around this corner here with the window in the background. In the game, things are a lot lighter, and they've got rid of the window that lets the light in. However, it is very similar, to be honest, in terms of the actual look and appearance of the walls here. The bottom of the stairs look like this in the movie and look like this in the game. When Bond reaches the top of the stairs, this is what it looks like. In the game they've stuck with the green sort of stripe wall appearance, and it does change the appearance ever so slightly, but the overall aesthetic is pretty fitting. We even get to see some of the corridors in the office section of the archives in both the game and the movie. Really it's just a case of them turn the lights down in the movie and turn the lights way up in the video game, which is obvious because they obviously want people to see what they're playing through. The main archives themselves are stuffed to the brim with bookshelves. You can also see that it's spread out across the two levels. In the video game, the majority of the archives are actually pushed to the back of the room. There's only 3 bookcases in this dual room setup, but you can also see the windows at the end of the bookcases. When Bond and Natalia look outside the window, they see a bunch of tanks and army vehicles. In the video game, when you look out these windows, you just see a small alleyway. When Bond jumps in the tank, you can actually see Ormov and Natalia heading to Ormov's car. In the game, the tank is kind of just parked up in the car park and it immediately heads out onto the road. In the movie, Bond has to smash through a brick wall in order to get to the road, so you can see how this is different in layout and in theme. In the movie, the chase scene with the tank is completely different from that in the game. In the game, you're basically just driving the tank through the streets, whereas in the movie, Bond is actively chasing Ormov and Natalia. Now, there aren't too many similarities because of the layout differences between the two. However, there is this one sort of motif which I've always kind of assumed was supposed to be sort of a nod to the movie. Moving on to Depot, in the movie, it's literally just one scene of Ormov, Natalia and Xenia jumping on board the train. There's no warehouses, there's no secret missions, and Bond drives off in the tank. In the movie, this is the first time we get a good look at the train. In this shot, you can actually see that it's only 3 carriages long, which if you've played the game, you'll know is completely silly because in the game, there's many carriages for you to work your way through. In the movie, the train stops under a bridge because Bond shoots a tank round straight into the front of it, whereas in the game, Bond shoots the brake panels in each of the carriages and he's able to stop the train that way, and it just happens to be under a bridge. In the movie, Janice's own luxury cars are on show, and you can see here that there's lots of nice pictures, there's wallpapers, there's even some tables. In the game, these are kind of represented by these fairly simple rooms, and you can see here there's a massive sofa at the end of this, but there's also a table. I get why they didn't kind of go too heavy on the detail in this one, but at the same time it is quite funny that they made the effort. When we come to the compartment where Bond and Janice have their big showdown, you can see this weird green textured wallpaper on the walls. You can also see like green is very much the strong colour here. It's very cramped, it's very dark, and it very much feels like a sort of nasty place. They actually do a pretty decent job of recreating this space in the game. You can see that the green weird wallpaper texture is still here. They even have the little shutters on the windows, and while in the movie they sort of shut on top of the windows, in the game they have these shutters that sort of drop down on top of the windows. You can also see here the PC that Natalia uses to spike Boris in the movie. In the game, it's just a PC terminal on top of the desk. We next jump to the jungle section of Goldeneye, and in the movie we get treated to all these beautiful establishing shots, showing off the jungle and also showing off the location that the final part of the movie is going to take place in. When the plane gets shot down, we get to see it in this burning heap here. I have to give praise to the game here. They actually do show the plane crashing and exploding, and I feel that the jungle levels, while they aren't one-to-one with the movies because it's so brief in the movies, I do feel that the vibe fits very nicely into what the movie was trying to achieve. In the movie, Xenia drops out of the sky to attack Bond and Natalia, but in the game you fight her on a bridge. What's really cool about Janice's base though is that in the video game they actually went out of their way to do as best as they could to recreate this space. I mean, if you look at this, you can tell that these are supposed to be the same spaces. Now obviously there's a lot less detail in the games, but it is clear that they were trying to make sure people felt like they were actually in Janice's base. It also doesn't help that they caked the outside of this area with these really thick and opaque windows that sort of block the view into other sections. I assume this was done for performance issues, but you can see Boris's station here is in the game. The big difference between the game and the movie is in the movie, Bond and Natalia come in through the hole at the bottom of the drained water pit, whereas in the game, they come in through an elevator. In the movie, Natalia comes to this PC off to the side to hack into Boris's Goldeneye satellite. However, in the game, I think it's this computer terminal that it's meant to be, because this one's just tucked off to the side of the main central area. And finally we've reached Cradle. Now the thing with Cradle is that from a distance it looks similar to what's in the game, but there's a lot more walkways, a lot more sort of discrete pathways, and the Cradle itself looks very different when you actually take a close look at it. And it does have these struts in the game as well, but it also has them in the movie here. In the game they've obviously simplified the bowl to make it easy for the player to navigate, but it looks similar from a distance. You also get this weird little platform that in the movie looks absolutely tiny. I don't know how 2 grown men can fit on that. They really simplified the final part of this. In the movie, this is where the final cinematic fight takes place and then Bond ends up dropping down. In the game here, the platform's been made bigger and the room up there is so simple. And that's it for this comparison of GoldenEye the movie and GoldenEye the game. I always appreciate the different interpretation of these spaces across both GoldenEye the game and GoldenEye the movie, which I feel makes experiencing both kind of essential for die-hard fans of GoldenEye. If I missed any obvious spots out, let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to do a follow-up video in the future. But this was really fun, and it really showcases just how solid the design direction of GoldenEye was, that it conveyed itself across two mediums like this.